Let's look at John, the 11th chapter. Very familiar story. Be looking at it from a little bit different perspective, though. We're not going to be reading the entire chapter, but we are going to read some verses in the chapter. We'll begin to read verse number 1. This is John, the 11th chapter. Verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Now this was on the southeast side of the Mount of Olives, the location. Jesus was ministering on the the east side of the Jordan River, called Judea beyond Jordan, which was a good day's ride on an animal, and even more so if you're walking. And but Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. Lazarus at this time was 30 years old. Mary at this time was 16. Martha was 14. And so Jesus had become good friends of the family. What Lazarus did for a living, we don't know. And we do know that Bethany was quite active in the medical field, and I'll explain that to you a little bit later on, so let's continue to read. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, or said to Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. So this was the messenger that they sent to find Jesus, which was, like I said, about an hour away. About a day away by animal, more so than by foot. And it seems that he was on an animal of some sort when he found him. Then Jesus heard that Lazarus, or he was sick. Then Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now let's look at verse number 11. These things said he, and after he saith unto them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go, and that I may awaken him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Albeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. So Jesus knew that Lazarus was dead when he received the message, that he was sick. He had already died. Now let's look at verse number 39. Jesus said, take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. And Jesus saith unto her, said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shalt see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had thus spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and feet with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. And Jesus said unto them, Loose him and let him go. Now, back during the day of the Persian Empire, Cyrus, the Persian emperor, allowed some of the captives, if not all of the captives who wanted to go, to leave, and they could be resettled in their home countries as long as that home country was under the rule of Persia. The Jews were part of those people. 1/3 of the Jews stayed in Persia. They didn't want to move. Another third went to Israel, and there you remember under Zerubbabel, they had a new temple built, and under Nehemiah, the walls were rebuilt and so forth. And so that was that 1/3 that went there. Another third went to Egypt, and at that time, Persia was under the control of Egypt. Cyrus gave them an island. The island was called the Island of Elephantine. It was down by near this present city of Aswan. It was near where the dam is now. It was a huge island. Now a lot of it's covered because of the dam waters, but at one time it was quite large, and that was given to the Jews by Cyrus. So they settled there and developed their own society, a Jewish society in the very middle of Egypt, which is quite unique. They even built a temple there, and they had their own celebrations, their own holy days, and so forth. But as time went on, they began to compromise with the locals. You know, here in America, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't celebrate Christmas, regardless of whether they're a believer or not. They like that day off, okay? And so the Jews started doing the same thing. They liked that day off. And so they began to not only honor their own celebrations, but also the Egyptian celebrations, and begin to adopt some of the Egyptian ways and some of the Egyptian philosophies. And they even allowed some of the Egyptians' statues of Pharaoh initially, and then even the gods and goddesses to be planted in Elephantine to show that we are Jewish, but we also honor you. And so it was a kind of a Judo-Egyptian existence and a society. And one of the ways that one of the cultural things that they adopted was quite unique to the Jews. The Jews normally buried everybody within 24 hours of death, but the Egyptian Jews followed the Egyptian method of burial. And you all know what that is, the mummies thing. And I'll explain that to you in a bit. But that was one of the things that they adopted. Okay, now in 62 BC, 64 BC, dictator Sulla absolutely hated the Jews. He hated them with a hatred beyond anything you can imagine. And he says to his consul, which Mark Antony was part of that council, and as well as Augusta, he said, I am going to exterminate these Jews, and I will exterminate every one of them who lives on the earth. And I will start with Egypt, with the community Elephantine, and we will gain back that land for us. Mark Antony was quite concerned about this. He had relatives who were Jewish, and not close, but still relatives. And so Mark Antony at that time was the governor of the region that we began to call Judea, Samaria, the Galilee, and all of that. So he owned that area and governed it for Rome. And he appealed to Sulla. He says, let me have the Jews of Egypt, and I will settle them in my territory. So Sula gave, at a time of weakness, he says, he gave the Jews in Egypt to Mark Antony. So he had them moved over to the Judea area, and he gave them, on behalf of Rome, the southeast side of the Mount of Olives. And there they built the city of Bethany. They became a ward of Rome. And so they still maintained their Jewish traditions, their Jewish religion, and so forth, but they were under the protection of Rome, particularly Mark Antony. And there were some stipulations that went up. First of all, you could not own property in Bethany unless you were Egyptian Jew or had an ancestry of Egyptian Jew. If you did have property there, it meant that you were Egyptian Jew. There was no other people could own property there except Egyptian Jews or Egyptian Jew heritage. You couldn't spend the night there without an invitation from someone who lived there, an Egyptian Jew who was there. Now, Egyptian Jews were not demanded. It wasn't commanded for them to live there, but it was a privilege for them to live there if they wanted to do so. I mean, you could live any place, but if you lived in Bethany or in that area, it was a major deal. It was a good thing, and it was a very good thing. And so this is where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived. They were Egyptian Jews, and they lived there. Another thing about Bethany that was quite amazing is that Bethany was the home of the very first almshouse. Now, almshouse is a hospital, which means that private individuals, whether it be Egyptian Jews or Romans or anyone else, and or any Jews, they could reduce their tax liabilities by going to the almshouse and paying money to them for the care of the sick, and they would get credit against their taxes. And so some people try to say that Lazarus was the director of this almshouse, and some people say he was a businessman or whatever. We know that they treated multiple diseases there. They treated leprosy. They also treated diseases of the lungs and various other plague-type things. And it was probably at one time, I would say at least for 1,000 years, from the time that it was founded in 63 AD, that it was probably the most prolific, the greatest, and the most effective hospital in the entire world. And so that is Bethany. Now, Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived in Bethany. Jesus was ministering on the east side of the Jordan River. Well, the girls sent a messenger to Jesus. It took them a day to get there, a day to find Jesus. And when he found Jesus, Jesus gave him a very interesting statement. Lazarus died while this messenger was en route. He was still alive when he left the girls, but as he made his way to Jesus, Lazarus died. But there weren't any cell phones in that day, so he didn't know anything about it. When he got to Jesus, he told Jesus about the situation, about Lazarus, and this is what Jesus told him. Knowing that Lazarus was already dead, he said, you go back and tell the girls that this sickness is not unto death. Now, the messenger was all excited. He turned around and ran back. The got to the girls, to the home. I got great news for you. I found Jesus, and I got great news. He said for me to tell you that this sickness was not unto death, but that God would be glorified. And they said, well, we appreciate that, but our brother died the very day that you left. And by the way, where is Jesus? Well, he didn't come back with me. Now, all of you who are believers in here, when you get sick, what do you do first thing? The first thought that comes across your mind is Jesus. Okay? Now, I realize some of you may be like me. If I get sick, I got a headache, I take an aspirin and pray. I don't care which one works. But generally, believers go to the Lord. And is there any doubt in your mind that he don't hear you? Now, there are those times he doesn't do it immediately, but there's no doubt in my mind that he doesn't hear. That's right. He hears our prayer. There's no doubt in these girls' mind that Jesus wouldn't come back. None at all. And then he wasn't there. Well, did he say when he was going to come? No, I'm sorry, he didn't. Well, did he send back anything that we should do? No. He just says this was not unto death, and then that was it, and I left. Well, how about maybe he's coming later on in the week? He didn't say whether he was coming or not. And he didn't. He stayed at least 2 more days, then took another day to get back. The Egyptian Jews had a very unique method of burial. It was not the Jewish method. It was more the Egyptian method. On day 1, the day of death, the body was cut open. And out of the body was taken the brain, was taken the eyeballs, the tongue, the lungs, and the heart. And then pumped back, and then the blood was drained out. Pumped back into the veins and the vessels and the cavities where these organs were was a solution of vinegar and wine and honey, and sometimes frankincense, sometimes myrrh, and that it was kind of like embalming fluid. And they would pump it through the whole body, and then once that was done, they sewed the body back up. Then the body organs then were placed in a pottery jar, and the pottery jar was also filled with the same type of solution, and they sealed the pottery jar. And then after that, they put rosums and gums and that type of stuff on the body, and then wrapped it with linen. Yeah, you've all seen mummies in that method. Have a separate covering for the face, separate napkin type thing, and then then after that they wrap the whole body, and they wrap them layer after layer after layer. And so after the first layer, they put more gums and rosins, and then the second layer, and then they put them again, and then the next layer. History tells us, the early church history tells us that Lazarus had 18 layers of linen. So a body that would initially be this big ended up being that big. And a body that was initially weighed 150 50 pounds now weighed 300. The Egyptian Jews had a different type of burial process in tombs also. They did entomb. They didn't have ossuaries or any of that type of thing. And if you ever get a chance to go to Israel, you can go to Lazarus' tomb. You can still see it. And what it is, it's the Egyptian Jewish tombs had two compartments. You had an upper compartment, which is about maybe a 7 by 7, and in that compartment, which is ground level, that's where the pottery jar of the organs would be placed. And then you go down 40 steps. Sometimes it was a straight staircase. Sometimes it was an L shape. Lazarus is L shape. You go down a set of steps, have a little landing, and go down the rest of them. Then you had the bottom chamber. The bottom chamber was about a 15 by 15. And in that bottom chamber was a sarcophagus, or a burial box. Now, the 40 steps represented the 40 years in the wilderness, with Moses leading them. And so that's why it was significant for the Egyptian Jews for this type of burial. And so once you got down to the bottom chamber, then a sarcophagus was there made of stone. The sarcophagus stood up about 1 meter, a little over a yard, and was about approximately 8 feet long, and then it was about plus or minus 5 to 6 feet wide. And you would lay the body or the mummy inside that sarcophagus, and then you put a stone lid on top of it and seal it with beeswax. And then after that was done, then the body was interned completely. Now, the first day, the day that the organs were removed, is when the family had their private times with the one who had died. The second day, and he would be at home. He wasn't placed in the sarcophagus until day 4. Okay, and so the first day was with the family. The second day with family members who were in the region. The third day, friends and relatives who in the region could come, and or distant relatives. And then the fourth day is the day of burial. And the reason for that is that the Egyptian Jews had a teaching, and they said that God had the ability to raise anyone from the dead, if they're dead, regardless what happens to the body. But once the body begins to decay, which is on day 4, then that means that God has given the body over to Satan to destroy, and that God himself could not raise from the dead on day 4 and beyond. Jesus arrived on the day of the funeral. The day in which not even God could raise him. So he got there, but he got there with no hope. He got there without not even a promise that I was going to do this to these girls. It would just been better off if he'd not show up at all. You know, in our lives, sometimes we get that. Lord, I needed you at 8 o'clock. Now it's 5 o'clock. I don't need you no more. Just forget it. The girls were, I can't imagine how they felt. Their greatest friend, their only hope, their greatest hope, was nowhere to be found during their major time of crisis. And now, when it was far too late to do anything about it, he shows up. Now, that don't make no sense. Lazarus was put down in the sarcophagus box. They went back up to the upper chamber and sealed the tomb, put a box or a stone over the top of it and sealed it up.
Welcome to Canaan, a small indigenous community here on the west coast of Colombia. In recent years, Canaan has grown tremendously. The people here have a heart for God and for sharing His love. This is where the Cubit Foundation does their work. Over the years, Cubit has worked on developing the community in many ways, and by doing so, they've developed personal relationships and bonds that will last a lifetime.
Cuando viene cualquier persona extranjero, pues lo recibimos con mucho amor, recibimos con mucho aprecio, con mucho afecto, porque sabiendo que si esta persona vive tan lejos, no nos conoce y nos viene a visitar, eso para nosotros es muy satisfactorio y toca mi corazón de una manera especial.
Brad Charles is one of the leaders behind Cubit and their work in Canaan, Colombia. His passion is for helping people in need around the world and doing God's work out here on the mission field. The Cubit Foundation has done some incredible work here thus far, and God's presence is truly evident. Partnerships with local Colombian churches, Cubit has taken part in service to the village of Canaan. And with your help, Cubit will continue to serve them and many more around the world.
When people give to Cubit, I want them to go. I want them to go with me. And I want them to experience this.